Yes, I'll just, good evening. I'll just read the beginning of the novel in Ross Benjamin's wonderful translation. I'll read about like just a few pages to give you an idea of what this is all about. The first chapter is called Shoes, and it starts like this. The war had not yet come to us. We lived in fear and hope and tried not to draw God's wrath down upon our securely walled town with its 105 houses and the church and the cemetery where our ancestors waited for the day of resurrection. We prayed often to keep the war away. We prayed to the Almighty and to the kind Virgin. We prayed to the Lady of the Forest and to the little people of midnight, to St. Gervin, to Peter the gatekeeper, to John the evangelist. And to be safe, we also prayed to old Mela, who during the 12th night, when the demons are let loose, roams the heavens at the head of her retinue. We prayed to the horned ones of ancient days and to Bishop Martin, who shared his cloak with the beggar when the latter was freezing, so that they were then both freezing and pleasing to God, for what's the use of half a cloak in winter? And of course, we prayed to St. Maurice, who had chosen death with a whole legion rather than betray his faith in the one just God. Twice a year, the tax collector came and always seemed surprised that we were still here. Now and then, the merchants came, but since we didn't buy much, they soon went on their way, which was all right with us. We needed nothing from the wide world and gave it no thought until one morning a covered wagon pulled by a donkey rolled down our main street. It was a Sunday at the beginning of spring. The stream was swollen with meltwater, and in those fields that weren't lying fallow, we had sown the seed. A red canvas tent was pitched on the wagon. In front of it crouched an old woman. Her body looked like a bag, her face seemed made of leather, her eyes looked like tiny black buttons. A younger woman with freckles and dark hair stood behind her. But on the coach box sat a man we recognized, even though he had never been here before. And when the first of us realized who he was and called his name, others too realized, and soon many voices were calling from all directions. Till is here, Till has come. Look, it's Till, could be no one else. Leaflets came even to us. They came through the forest. The wind carried them, merchants brought them out in the world. More of them were printed than anyone could count. They were about the ship of fools and the great priestly folly and the evil Pope in Rome and the devilish Martinus Luther of Wittenberg and the sorcerer Horridus and Dr. Faust and the hero Gawain of the Round Table, and indeed about him, Till Eulenspiegel, who had now come to us himself. We knew his pied jerkin, we knew the battered hood and the calfskin cloak. We knew the gaunt face, the small eyes, the hollow cheeks, and the buck teeth. His breeches were made of good material, his shoes of fine leather, but his hands were thieves' or scribes' hands, which had never done work. His right hand held the reins, his left the whip. His eyes flashed as he greeted this person and that. And what's your name? He asked the little girl. She was speechless, unable to fathom that a person of such renown should be addressing her. Well, tell me. When she stammered that her name was Martha, he only smiled as if he had always known it. Then he asked intently, and how old are you? She cleared her throat and told him. In the 12 years of her life, she had not seen eyes like his. There might be eyes like these in the free cities of the empire and at the great courts, but never before had anyone with such eyes come to us. Martha hadn't known that such a strength, such agility of the soul could speak from a human face. One day, She would tell her husband, and then much later her incredulous grandchildren, who would consider Eulenspiegel a figure of old legends, that she had once seen him in the flesh. In the meantime, the wagon rolled by, and his gaze had glided elsewhere to others on the roadside. Again, there were shouts of "Till has come" along the street, and "Till is here" from the windows, and it's Till from the church square unto which his wagon now rolled. He cracked the whip and stood up. With lightning speed, the wagon turned into a stage.
Thank you, Daniel Kehlmann. Now, it's worth to say that the beginning of this book is not the actual beginning of the story, because you didn't write it in a chronological order. It's worth to say for those of you who didn't read already the book. Daniel Kehlmann, please tell us, why did you get back to this emblematic figure, to this mythological figure of Till Eulenspiegel or Eulenspiegel?
Yeah, well, my first idea was not to write about him so much as to write about the 17th century, which of course was not the original time of the Till Eulenspiegel stories, which are much older. The stories of Till Eulenspiegel, you can't really call him a historical figure. It's more like a figment of legends, which might have a historical core or some grain of historical truth, but we really don't know much about that, or we don't know it all. So, but they are all from late Middle Ages, 13th century, so much earlier, much older. But what I wanted to do is to write about the time of the wars of religion, the 17th century, the time when European civilization was in a meltdown that you can really only compare to what happened in the 20th century. And I wanted to write a panoramic novel, a novel where character, or let's put it like that, a novel where the reader would get a tour through this whole strange world, which is very strange to us because it was the world before Enlightenment. So it was a world where you can't even say people were superstitious, because being superstitious or being rational was not really something you could choose between. Like believing in curses and in magic would not have been superstitious. It would have been just what everyone believed the world was like. So I was thinking about who could be the guide, so the guiding character, the person that could take the reader to different parts of that world. And of course, the world was very people lived there very stationary lives. Most people never moved anywhere. Also, most people didn't ever get into contact with people from other social classes or other social groups. The world was incredibly fixed and rigid in social terms too. And so but there were some groups who could travel everywhere and meet everybody. And one of these groups were the entertainers, or the vagrants, the jesters, the people who were performing. They could really go everywhere. They were moving. They didn't have homes, but also they would perform everywhere. They would perform in villages. They would perform in cities. They would perform at royal courts. So I thought that's a jester would be an interesting guide through this time, not just for the reader, in a way for me, like explore this world together with this character. And then I had this strange flash of an idea where I thought, but then as a writer, I can cast everybody. Like I'm a director who can get any actor I want. I just have to summon them. And I thought, then why not cast the prototypical, the mythical Northern European jester himself? And that would have been Till Eulenspiegel. And then, of course, the fact that he lived a few hundred years earlier, it didn't seem such a problem to me. First, because he didn't live at all. he's a fictional character anyway. And second, because the world didn't change that much. So the world between the 14th and the 17th century, if you lived in a village, was pretty much the same world. It's nothing you can compare to the world between the 18th century and today, for example. So it didn't actually seem such a big thing to do, actually. So that was a long answer to your question.
Thank you. But what was your initial intention? Did you wanted to write a historic novel about the 30 Years' War? Did you wanted to write a kind of thriller, a roman noir, a dark novel? What was it like at the beginnings of your writing?
I didn't think of it as a thriller. I certainly thought of it as a dark topic and a dark book. Well, the first thing I was thinking about doing was not so much actually about the 30 Years' War. It was about the time that scholars call early modernity. So the pre-Enlightenment time. And how, and not just write about it, but really put a story in there. So in a way, explore how profoundly different the human mind was, and also human emotional relationships, that they were really, really different on every level. And I was thinking about that for a long time, because it's a difficult thing to do, but it was exactly the alienness of that world that attracted me. So it was not. I often get asked about. I mean, everybody who writes anything set in the past gets asked about the similarities to today, the parallels to our life. But what attracted me most was how profoundly different it was. But then I thought, okay, if we go into early modernity, then of course, as a writer, it's more interesting to go to a period of upheaval and war than to go to a period of stability and peace. And then, of course, it's not far-fetched to think, so then why not go to the absolute meltdown of everything, which was the 30-year war. And I was kind of aware of the fact that some of the greatest works of German literature were actually set in the 30 Years' War and in early modernity. I mean, you could even make an argument Faust is not in 30 Years' War, obviously, but is an early modernity story. And so is, of course, Schiller's Wallenstein, and of course Brecht's Mother Courage. And I felt like it has always been very, very, very interesting and scary, but also a profound experience for writers to go there. So I wanted to try this myself.
Writing this kind of novels, historical novels, involves immersing in this past world, and it's quite a dark world as you describe it. How did you document it, all this historical time lapse?
You mean you're asking about my research, how I got
exactly,
into
yeah.
this? There was a very, very helpful book that by a writer who's sadly not alive, a historian called Van Dulmen, who wrote a 3-volume history of everyday life in early modernity. I don't think I could have written my written TYLL without that, because there's been this great shift in how historians work in the last, I would say, 30 years, away from just battles and treaties and king and queens, and more looking at everyday life and how regular people lived, and also how so-called trivial things worked. What kind of windows did people have? How did they How did they actually cook their food and things like that? And Van Dulmen's 3 volumes, which I read very, very carefully, were really a treasure trove for me. And then, of course, on the other side, there is of course literature. There is chiefly among all of the novels, and Baroque novels are very hard to read because it was a different paradigm of the novel. It was really they were incredibly long, and the authors really put everything in there that they could possibly conceive of. But I did, of course, very carefully read Grimmelshausen's Simplicius Simplicissimus, which is a direct. It's like a time machine. Not so much the story, which is really over the top in many ways, but the way people talk, the way he describes clothes or rooms, and then of course the third thing I would mention is music. Music is really the ultimate time machine. If you with music you can really directly access how people felt in a way. And so I was listening to Baroque music to an insane degree. So I really I have a son who's 15 now, and he was I mean the book is now I think I published it 7 years ago, so I worked on it before that. So he was quite small, and he told me he cannot stand that music anymore. Please stop, please. But I had headphones, so but music was a very, very important part of getting into that of getting into the emotional, the inner world of the 17th century.
But were there any literary figures from that period, from that medieval literature, that influenced your work with TYLL?
I mean, there was of course, and that's not a joke, this answer. So don't I'm not making fun of your question. I'm serious. There was Till Eulenspiegel, but because there is this old book of anecdotes, and they're really not very funny anymore. Very few of them are. Most of them are really dark and brutal, and it's just about him showing up and doing bad things to people. But I felt there was some, well, I can't say there was a real character there. It was more like there is a real core of a very strong, energetic, mythical figure. And the more you read about it, the more you feel like you get in touch with this strange mythical figure. And I felt like he started to live in my novel, and it was this weirdest experience. I'd never worked with mythical characters before in my life as a writer, and I don't think I will ever do that again. I wouldn't know how, but it was really how shall I put that? I never had to think what he would say, for example. When other people talked, there was always like as if he would give a direct response. He always did things that surprised me. So it really felt as if I didn't have to invent him, as if it felt as if he had come to me while I was writing this book. And when I was done, it felt as if he now left the book and is now out there in the world for other writers to work with. So I really felt he was a character I didn't need to invent. He was already there.
You were talking about this dichotomy between science and superstition, and this is something that really struck me reading your book. This was really a very interesting point. So, Gutenberg invented a movable printing press by the mid-15th century. So it's safe to say that printed books were relatively new in the 17th century, at the dawn of the 30 Years' War. It is an understatement to say that access to books was not democratic at that time. But still, TYLL had access to books, and his very humble father, a miller, had books that he inherited. He was a reader.
He also steals many of them. So he also steals books. Yes.
But these books doesn't mean he's also wise. These books doesn't give access to wisdom, isn't it?
Well, some of them do, maybe, but he doesn't know. He doesn't really have a way to find out which ones. So, with Till's father, it was a character that really moved me a lot when I invented him. With Till's father, Klaus, I really I felt I invented a man who really wanted to know and wants to understand the world. So he does have what we would call the mind of a scientist, but at a moment and in a social class where science was not just not available to him. So there's no one who's going to help him. There's no one who's going to teach him anything. He's totally on his own. The only thing he can do is steal random books and try to understand the world. And of course, it's quite hit or miss. And some of his theories are, of course, very hapless and funny, but it's not really his fault. There's just no one he can ask. If you're completely on your own, you will not get very far, not in life and not in thinking. And he has those books. He is able to read them, but he does not know how to place them at all. And then, of course, there's this tragic turn in his life that then finally two erudite men arrive, two Jesuits, and he asks them for help. But they're not helping him. They have him arrested and put to trial. So it's a tragic story.
Let's think. Till is living in 2020. Would he get the shot, the vaccine, or would he be an anti-vaxxer?
No, he wouldn't care, actually.
Really?
He would. I don't think he would care at all. He would. Because he has lived for hundreds of years, so he's not afraid of the. I mean, he doesn't get the plague. He comes close to the plague in the book, and he doesn't get the plague. So you cannot ask Till. I feel like you cannot ask him these rational questions. You can ask other characters in the book, but you cannot ask him. I feel like whoever would want him to be on their side or give an opinion about something as rational as vaccines, he would just insult them. Whoever on which side wants him to have an opinion or to get vaccinated or not get vaccinated. He's too much. I mean, he is also all about defying expectations and disrupting the social order. So he would just not care and offend everyone who asks him.
But for the readers nowadays, for the contemporary readers, what must we retain from this view on the world by Till? From this view and this mentality over science, over the world?
I mean, his mentality is deeply anarchistic. So and also quite destructive, actually. There is some, I would say, what he stands for, what Matei, who's a performer, who's a tightrope walker, what he stands for is among other things the idea that art is not just a nice and pleasant and friendly and rational thing. There is something also quite dark and dangerous in art. And that's what he stands for. And there is some and there is, in a world that's so fixed and so rigid, and where there's just no way to ever escape all those hierarchies, there is an incredible potential of freedom in this anarchic side of him. So, but he's not a nice guy. You would not be happy in his company.
So TYLL is active agent during this 30 years war, but he also seems a bit passive, distant, estranged. How did you conceive this character?
I mean, you could also read him as a human being who suffers from deep trauma, because his father gets executed. He has to run away to not get executed himself. Then he gets violated in the most terrible way as a young boy by soldiers in the woods. It's really terrible. So, and he comes away from that as not a fully formed human being, somehow less and more than a human being. So less in the way that a certain side of the soul, a certain amount of soulful relationships to other human beings is just lost to him. He never behaves like anyone's friend, or he never marries. He never behaves like a lover. On the other hand, he's kind of becomes indestructible, and he becomes a force of uh, anarchy and liberation, so to speak. So so you can, and of course, then he at some point in the book he decides that he's not going to die, and he sort of, I mean, the book is kind of hinting at that. He does become strangely immortal after that. So he becomes a mythical character, but it all starts with a deeply traumatized young boy. So there's a very sad side of this. Yeah, I said you don't want to be close to him. You also really don't want to be him. I mean, he's not the only character in the book. There are other characters who I like very much and who I feel close to, but you cannot feel close to TYLL. That's kind of impossible.
Because among other, he's a jester, he's a trickster, a clown, and there is a certain sadness about him, but also something to laugh about. Also, so it's this dichotomy about his character. But how do you feel for him? Because you talk as a friend. You talk about him
Yeah,
as a very close friend.
I mean, I really like him. I like him. He was he was liberating to me in an artistic way. I was really happy I was able to write this book, and I owe it to him in a way. Um, but you cannot claim him as your own, so to speak. So if he would be here now, he would insult me very much. He would not be nice to me at all. He's not nice to anyone. That's kind of his brand. That's how he rolls.
Okay, if somebody has questions or comments, I would very much like to invite you. If not, I have another question for Daniel Kehlmann. Could you imagine TYLL walking around the north side of the Black Sea coast from, I don't know, Crimea, from Sevastopol to Odessa, what he would feel like?
I could actually, because he is a creature of darkness and dark times. So so he, but then on the other hand, of course, whenever whenever in the novel he does encounter human suffering, he is actually kind of, I wouldn't say nice, but helpful at least. So he's anarchistic, but he's not sadistic. He lives in he thrives in dark times, but he does not contribute to human suffering. So in a way, yes, I could imagine that. That could be a there could be a second volume, but of the novel. Maybe I'm going to do that, because he is kind of he is a, well, speaking in literary terms, a character like him is a very good device to uh, to write about very dark times, because He goes to the dark places, or to the places where there's war or danger. But then on the other hand, he's not broken by it at all. Like even when the worst happens to him, he's strangely unbowed and unbroken. And that's very helpful for you as a writer, because it makes it possible for you to throw a cold glance, so to speak. I think Yeats put it like that: cast a cold eye on life, on death, and you can do that with him, so to speak. But yeah, I mean, maybe, I mean, I hope the war is over before I get to write that book. I really do.
What would be a contemporary TYLL be like? Could you describe it?
Yeah, I mean, I've asked people have asked me that, and I have only have only one answer. It would be exactly the same TYLL, because he's immortal. He's immortal. He's a mythical character, so it's exactly the same guy, the same character you have in the book. He would just still be around.
But he would have access to Facebook and Twitter and all these networks and all these gadgets.
Yeah, I think I mean, of course, it's kind of stretching the analogy, but I would say he is in the novel, he is an artist in times where art is entirely analog. So his art is just in walking the tightrope, acting, mimicking people. He doesn't even write, or he does kind of sing, but it's not it's not what he does best. So his art is profoundly analog in a way. So in Facebook, I mean, my TYLL, the TYLL I was thinking about, he wouldn't be interested in that. I mean, of course, I can see someone else write a novel about a version of TYLL that's entirely exists in the web, for example, and exists online and only online. And that would be very interesting too. I'm not saying I own him. You cannot own a mythical character. But that's a book someone else has to write.
Okay. Are there any comments or questions in the audience? Yes, please. Wait for the mic.
Thank you very much for this really wonderful introduction. I have one question, because there was fascinating how you said that you understood the way of feeling through music. And of course, I'm now trying to to listen a lot of Baroque music. Could you describe in words, I mean, what this music changes, or how it transforms, or what sort of does it transmit in emotions?
I can try, but of course the point of music is that you can't really put it into words. But I would say there is something about Baroque music. You feel like there is something really playful, and at the same time it's utterly and profoundly serious. So in Baroque music, you can feel that it was composed and played and heard by people who had to take into account that they could die any day, that the world was profoundly unsafe, and they felt only God gives you a certain amount of safety, and safety is not here, but maybe in the other world with God. And you can feel how hard life was, and at the same time you can feel this refusal to despair because of the hardness of life, that there is always something hopeful. There is no hopeless Baroque music, and it's so beautifully complex. The complexity is amazing, especially when you think about how simple life was for people. So But again, all of that is a very poor attempt to put into words what music can give you in direct way, and it can give that to you in seconds, and not after reading 5 big books. It gets you in there right away, and I mean also it's really, when you listen to Baroque, I mean that's not just true about Baroque music. That's true about any music of the past. While you listen to it, you feel exactly what the people listened to it back then when it was new felt. So in that sense, it's also a time machine. I mean, you can maybe not, like, you cannot fully translate it because you cannot translate music into words. But you do feel the same people felt back then, at least for a moment or for a minute. And I mean, this is just the most amazing thing, isn't it?
Thank you. One more question, Radu Vancu.
So, while you were discussing with Matei about the choice of TYLL as a trickster who transverses pre-modern history and those dark times, there came into my mind Thomas Mann's unfinished novel, Felix Krull, which is also a novel about a trickster who transverses modern history, some dark times in modern history. And my first question would be, why is the image of the trickster so profitable for a novelist in order to survey history? And I have another, because this is a too serious question, I have another question which seems more unserious, so to say. In Thomas Glavinich's novel Das Jonas Complex, there is a Daniel, which I think you are the prototype of, who sends messages. I am at a dinner with Zadie Smith. I am at a dinner with Salman Rushdie, and so on. So how does it feel to be a character who has dinner with so many famous writers, and how do you feel about it?
I mean, that what Thomas does in that book, it's what we call a running gag in film. I think that's what it's called, because it already started in his earlier book, Das bin doch ich, where there's a constant joke about me sending him annoying text messages. And Das bin doch ich is a book that's composed entirely of real characters, in kind of some of them in fictional situations. And Thomas is a good friend, and when he published that book, we decided that we'll never tell anyone which of the text messages are real and which ones he invented. So I'm not going to tell you, but it's a very, very funny book, and it's my text messages play a much smaller part in the other book, in Jonas Complex, but I do write a few text messages in there, but I'm not going to tell you whether they're real or not. So, but it's a wonderful book. And about Felix Krull, I can just say I was very interested in him. He's not like my TYLL at all. He's really different, because TYLL is a disruptor. He kind of destroys every social situation he gets into, whereas Felix Krull is the kind of trickster and imposter who fits in everywhere. So the point of Krull is he's kind of even the opposite of TYLL, I would say. You can throw him into any situation and he will survive, and he will not just survive, he will fit in there, and people won't notice he doesn't fit in there. One of the current jokes in Thomas Mann's novel is that, for example, in the beginning, and then quite for a while, he doesn't even speak French, and he's among French-speaking people, and he just pretends to speak French, but he's so good at it that they don't notice he doesn't understand them. And I actually wrote a film adaptation for a film that was made in 2020, Die Bekenntnisse des Hochstaplers Felix Krull, which disappeared because of COVID. It was in cinemas for like, I think, a few days, but I think it's available on DVD if you're interested. It's so I spent quite some time thinking about what to do with Felix Krull and how to adapt him into a film.
Okay, some more questions or comments? If not, Daniel Kehlmann, this is a recurring question here at the Odessa Festival, and I hope you won't judge me for asking again. What's the role of literature in times of war, in times of despair?
I don't think I have a very good answer to that, because literature can do so many things. If someone just writes beautiful poems about flowers, then that is kind of totally fine, even in times of war. And in times of war, great poems about flowers can also give people hope and strength. On the other hand, of course, in times where unbelievable crimes happen, it is also a role of literature to talk about these crimes and to expose them, and to fuel the anger against that, and to make people feel that this is unbearable. But this is a completely different kind of literature, but it's also extremely important. And then, of course, you have literature that gives people hope and makes people feel better about their lives, and maybe makes people laugh. And again, that is a completely different kind of literature, but it also has its important role, especially in dark times and in war. So I would say one of the great things about literature is it can be so many things to so many people, and we shouldn't make it smaller than it is by narrowing it down to this or that role. It's the great thing is it can do really different things for you according to what you need it to be.
But is there an imperative for writers, for poets, especially for public intellectuals, to get involved, to talk about war, to talk about politics, to talk about all this happening?
I don't think there's an imperative. I don't think you have to do that at all. It's really your right as a writer to not do that. But of course, there is a good reason, and there are many good reasons to get involved. So there are many good reasons, and there are things happening where we want to hear writers talk. Um, I mean, for example, no one can explain what happens in Russia right now better than Viktor Yerofeyev, and I'm very glad that he's in Germany and that I can read his take on the insane things happening in Russia, and he also does that in literature, and in his novel that just came out in Germany. And there are many other examples of that. So I wouldn't want to not have that at all. And I'm very grateful for writers who help me understand the absurdity of these times. But again, if someone chooses not to do that and still writes beautiful books, you cannot hold it against them.
You are Austrian and German both.
Mm-hmm.
You live between Berlin and New York, so you move a lot. How do you understand this war happening in Ukraine? How do you see it as a European and as a maybe sometimes American?
Well, I have to say I see it as a disturbing, terrible contingency in a way. There are some wars happening where you feel like you could have predicted it. There was kind of some historic development that led to them happening. And this war is not one of them. This is really the folly of one old man sitting in his bunker, reading history books, and forming crazy thoughts in his mind. And then because of the terrible system of dictatorship, being able to invade a peaceful country. And it's the worst thing about this terrible war that really, it's a good reason to never sleep at all and to just be sleepless and sad and terrified and think about it. But maybe one of the worst things about it that there's no historical necessity to it, like not even historical tendency. It is just utterly stupid and ridiculous that this ever happened.
Thank you. Any more questions or comments? Now, Daniel Kehlmann, your book TYLL was translated and published in many, many languages and published in many, many countries. Like maybe the myth and the legends about TYLL Eulerspiegel, the original ones. Were there any misunderstanding of your book? Had you been surprised by the interpretation of your novel in some country or another?
Not really with TYLL, no. I had a lot of amusing misunderstandings with a few years ago with Measuring the World, which in my view was a really comedy about Germanness and which is how people read it, but many people in Germany read it as a book about science. Which it also might be, but they kind of missed the comedy of it, and it was really a comedy, and so that was a misunderstanding that I had to deal with. And then also there is a real misunderstanding when your books get read at school, which is a great honor, and I'm not complaining about it. But now, I mean, TYLL doesn't get read at schools because it's too violent, but Measuring the World get read at schools a lot, and it's used by teachers often to describe to students what it was like and what Humboldt and Gauss, the main characters who are also historical figures, what they were like. And I can only tell you, don't do that, because it's a novel. Humboldt even sees a UFO flying over the Amazon, and Gauss meets ghosts. And it's really it's a crazy comic novel. My novel Ruhm, Fame, is a novel about technology, which gets read a lot at school too. But it was written, it's so dated in terms of the technology. It was published in 2009. It was written before there were smartphones, and now it's read at schools to talk to students about technology. It doesn't make sense to me. It's a great honor to be read at schools, but it's a huge misunderstanding.
Your books are humorful, most of them. There is maybe some kind of dark humor in TYLL or smart humor, but humor doesn't travel well because of culture. Humor doesn't travel well. Is there a user's guide for your kind of humor?
Sorry about the coughing, by the way. I got a cold, but it's not COVID. I hope I'm not infecting anybody with COVID. I don't have it. The user's guide for humor. I don't know. I have to say, I never thought about that. So, or I have to say, humor is the most risky thing to do in writing. If you write something sad, you can be pretty sure that people who read it will find it sad too. It's not hard to convey sadness. With humor, there's always the risk that, so even in that sense, humor doesn't always travel well. If you write something and you find it very funny, it's always quite possible that absolutely no one else finds it funny. And you cannot really plan that. And I have that a lot in my books. Some of the things that I feel are really, really funny are the things that no one else finds funny. And then some of the jokes where I feel like, yeah, it's okay, it's nice. These are the jokes that people keep talking to me about. So that's one of the great things about humor is it's really, you cannot really plan it well. It's really hit or miss. And with different cultures, I don't really know. It's just, I really think you cannot think about that too much. The way to use humor is just you have to do what yourself think is funny, what yourself can laugh about. And then you have to just hope that you won't be alone and that you won't be the only one laughing. And there's always a risk that you might be.
But your own humor, is it rather German or rather Austrian?
I think, I mean, I don't want to, I do not want to get into that cliche that Germans have no sense of humor, because I think that's not entirely fair and not true. There are some very, very good German comic writers, and there is real German humor. The problem is just that humor was in German culture was always considered something to be frowned upon. And that I have to say, comes directly from Schiller and Goethe. They thought comic writing was something despicable, and they said that. Goethe actually did say humor is for people with bad character. Imagine that, and he thought that. So in that sense, you're absolutely right. It was always Austrian culture where humor was much more developed, and where you always had funny writers being a part of the canon and being really respected for being funny. And so also, especially with Measuring the World, being a comedy about Germanness, I think the fact that part of me is Austrian and that I grew up in Austria made it easier for me to write a comedy about Germanness, to get a certain distance to German culture, a certain inner distance and a certain humorous distance. So I would say probably the funny side of my writing is more Austrian than German. It was a very long, very serious answer to your question about humor.
Thank you, Daniel Kehlmann. Measuring the World and Still, both of the books can be found at a bookshop in front of the Goethe Institute. Both book appeared by Pandora M Publishing House in the Anansi collection. TYLL was translated into Romanian by Maria Irod. Daniel Kehlmann, thank you for being with us tonight.
Thank you very much. Great pleasure.
And thank you for coming.